Hello, and thank you for joining me again today for the Finding Hope After Loss podcast. Don't forget to check out the new Lost Mom book club that will be starting soon. There's a post on the Journey for Jasmine Instagram and Facebook that you can see for more information. The books will not all be loss-themed books, though there might be a few that have that theme in there. And really, it's just a great way to be able to bond with other lost moms and also read good books at the same time. So today I am talking with Robin. She is discussing the loss of her baby due to a giant Omphalocele. She had to make the decision to terminate for medical reasons when she was 21 weeks and 3 days along. And then she was able to have her rainbow baby just a few months ago. So Robin was also a Project Finding Your Rainbow participant, which, if you're unfamiliar, that is the traveling rainbow skirt that travels around from one lost mom to the next. They take pictures with the skirt, and then the pictures and the stories are shared, and it is to help raise awareness for pregnancy and infant loss, and then also just give people a space to share their stories. So if you are interested in reading her story or any of the other rainbow skirt stories, right now there's 247 stories. We're quickly approaching 250, but you can read them all at journeyforjasmine.com. And if you're also interested in participating in that, you can find more information on the website as well.
Hello, everyone. Today I am here with Robin. Robin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I am Robin. I live in the Santa Cruz Mountains in California, so there are redwood trees right out behind me. I am 34 years old. I've been married for 5 years now, and my background is actually in child development, so I used to teach preschool and then kind of shifted towards parental education. I'm actually a lactation counselor, and I've taught newborn care classes for years, so I work with a lot of pregnant people in a professional capacity. And then, I also make and sell children's activity kits called Messy Play Kits. It's a lot of fun.
You sound busy. Many
Yes, a
different
lot of different
skills.
things. Exactly.
I'm
A
also
little of
jealous of
this,
the
a little of
trees
that.
because I've always wanted to see the redwoods and I've never had a chance to. So they look pretty big out there.
Yeah. It's a pretty magical place.
So can you tell us a little bit about your lost journey?
Yeah, so my husband and I started trying for a baby soon after the pandemic started. So, which we had been planning before the pandemic. So we weren't just like, well, we're bored, we might as well. Um, so we had been married for a few years. We've been together for a while before that. We had recently bought a house, so we were like, okay, we're doing this, in the right order, the marriage and then the house and then the babies. We're feeling like finally pretty ready for it. So I think it was summer 2020 is when we started trying to have kids. And it took about 6 months to get pregnant, which is fairly normal and average, but feels like forever when you're in it. And I just remember being so angry and so pissed and so heartbroken every single month, or not even every month because my cycles run long. So it was every 35 days is when my cycle is. So it's a whole extra week. And I remember being so mad because it's just so much waiting. Um, so it was, I think, only about 5 cycles before we got pregnant, but it again just felt so long. And then we got pregnant in January of 2021. And the pregnancy was, all of a sudden it was like everything's perfect and we're pregnant and this is exactly what we wanted. And I was feeling great. And I had minimal nausea and everything was looking great at all of our appointments. And I work for myself from home. So when I'm tired, I can just take a nap. When I want to take a walk, I can just take a walk. I can try to snack on healthier-ish things because I don't have to pack a lunch or eat whatever's provided for me at work. And so I was feeling really good. I was like, I'm so good at this being pregnant thing. And it's so easy and it's so much fun. And I'm really enjoying it. It's like what I've always meant to be. And I knew that I was always going to enjoy pregnancy. My mom had loved it. My sister had generally loved it. I come from a whole big family of like birthing women and women who really enjoy and are pretty good at being pregnant. So I absolutely loved it. And of course, this was during the pandemic. So my husband was not at any of the appointments with me. So I was going into all of them alone. And my doctor was actually doing scans at every appointment. Like I got an ultrasound at like the initial appointment and then also a few others. So it was really nice. Like we got to see the baby I got to see the baby pretty frequently. And we did not want to find out fetal sex. And then we decided to hold off until birth. And then the 20-week ultrasound appointment was actually it was May 11th, 2021. And my husband was actually allowed to join me for that appointment. So it was the very, very first one that he was going to be at. And I remember waking up that morning, we were 20 weeks and I was like, this is going to be perfect. He gets to see the baby. He's going to start to feel really connected to the baby. And like, we don't really want to find out fetal sex, but it'd be kind of fun. So like maybe the technician will like slip up and we'll get to know if it's a boy or a girl. And oh, this is so exciting. And we went in. And it was just this really weird appointment. Like the ultrasound tech was really distant and it was cold and it was quiet and it was dark and she really didn't talk a whole lot. And I was feeling pretty disappointed. Like I wanted, to be like talked through a lot of the things. And instead she laid me completely flat on the table so I couldn't even see the screen. And she was like, oh, I'll let you, lift up in a few minutes, but right now I just need to like really check things out. And then she just went dead silent for a really long time. And I was like, okay, well, this is my first anatomy scan. Maybe this is like how they do things. And then after a long time, she was like, okay, well, I'm going to go bring the doctor and I'll be back in a few minutes. I was like, okay, well, that seems a little weird, but like at the dentist, they always bring the dentist in right at the last minute, no matter what's going on. So like, maybe that's just what's going on. And that's what's happening. We just have to they have to make an appearance. So then the doctor comes in and he's like, okay, well, I'm going to scan for a few minutes. And I really need to focus. So if I'm really quiet, it's just because I'm really focused. And I was like, okay, this is starting to seem a little bit weird, but I'm ever an optimist. So there's no way anything could possibly be wrong. And my husband had just kind of retreated into his phone. He was just sitting there like very, very quiet on his phone. And then after a little bit, the doctor finally says, okay, why don't you guys come into my office? And I was like, oh no. And he pulls us in and he says, I have some really, really hard news for you. And I just burst into tears. Like, I don't even know what the news is. It doesn't matter. So our baby had what's called a giant omphalocele, which is when their abdominal cavity doesn't fully form. So baby had their liver, stomach, and intestines in an outside external sac outside of their body, basically. And it was almost like when you actually look at it, they had this like growth basically that was almost the size of baby's head. Like it's massive. And what that means is that the abdominal cavity doesn't actually grow big enough. So even when they're born, you can't just like squish that stuff back in. And omphalocele babies can be totally perfectly fine if they make it to term, if that sac doesn't rupture, if their lungs and heart look okay, and our babies did not. So our baby's heart was actually being pulled into the omphalocele, so it was not in the right position at all. It was looking pretty awful. So the doctor was saying things. He explained it really clearly. And I will always remember him with so much appreciation because he was just very clear. And he's like, I'm just going to tell you exactly what's going on. I'm not unfeeling or callous. I just want to get right to it. And I just really, really appreciate him for saying that. And he made it very clear from the beginning. He would say, here's the situation. If you choose to continue the pregnancy, here's what we will do. If you choose to terminate the pregnancy, here's what we will do. And it had not occurred to me until that point that I would I'm very much pro-choice. It should always be up to the birthing person as to whether or not they want to continue a pregnancy, but I've always wanted to be pregnant. I've always wanted children. It never occurred to me that that would happen at a time where I would need to have an abortion or anything. And then of course that's exactly what happened. So, yeah. So we kind of thought about it for a little bit. Basically, if we chose to continue the pregnancy, we were looking at super high risk appointments, delivering at a hospital that sees maybe 3 omphalocele babies a year. So it's not like they see this a ton and really are experts in this area. And we live in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. So like we have access to very good medical people. We have access to very good healthcare, which is absolutely wonderful. And they still only see a few of these a year. So this is very rare. And I ended up speaking with a doctor a few days later, and he said, look, if this was my wife, we would terminate the pregnancy. And it was just so good to hear, like, this is a really severe case. Omphalocele also can often be linked with other disorders and things that you don't see until birth or later. So you can also like hope that that part's okay and know what you're going into, and then be totally blindsided by a bunch of other complications later on. So my husband and I came home, and I had to make 7 of the worst phone calls I've ever had to make in my life. We called all of our parents, we called all of our siblings, and we just had to say over and over and over again, you know, they were expected to hear wonderful news from the anatomy scan. And instead it was like, so this terrible thing, this terrible news has come up, and we have to figure out what to do. So we did end up choosing to terminate the pregnancy. We terminated the pregnancy at 21 weeks and 3 days on May 21st, 2021. And I initially felt okay about it. I had a surgical D&C, so I was fully put under for the procedure. It was a 2-day procedure. And my sister is actually an abortionist with Planned Parenthood, and she flew down to be with me during that time. It was absolutely miraculous. Like, our community really rallied around us. My sister-in-law kept us fed for 2 weeks. My best friend came into town, and we went hiking all the time when we could. So it's actually interesting when I look back and reflect on it. The week leading up to the termination is actually like one of my favorite. Like, I just felt so loved and so held by my community while going through one of the worst things in my life. Yeah. And then the recovery initially was pretty easy. My milk came in, which I wasn't really expecting. My doctor had mentioned it kind of offhand. But luckily my sister had known that that was possible. So I then was this newly postpartum person without having my baby, and also with my milk coming in, and trying to figure out how to like make that stop right away. And initially it kind of all felt like a problem that needed to be solved. Like, okay, we have this, like, we're going to end this pregnancy, and then we're going to recover from this, and we're going to get pregnant again, and then it's going to be okay. Like, that was kind of my like grief denial process, I think, a little bit. And that of course is not really how it works. So after I think about 8 weeks, I realized I had retained tissue. So I was having some really weird bleeding issues and stuff like that. And I went in, and so I had a second D&C in the ER to deal with some retained tissues. So it took 12 weeks from the loss to when I actually got my cycle back. And then finally I was like, okay, now we're ready. We can start trying again. And my first cycle was a beautiful 4-week, 28 days exactly cycle, like I have never had before in my life. And that cycle we didn't try because we were told to give it at least 1 cycle. And then my next cycle was 6 weeks. And then my next cycle after that was 8 weeks and anovulatory. It just never ended, basically. So luckily my doctor was really responsive. I reached out to her and I asked her for a lot of help. So she was able to give me some progesterone to be able to like kick off a period. And then I started letrozole to be able to actually like regulate my ovulation. And after a couple of cycles of that, I was able to conceive my Rainbow, who is now 3 months old. So it's been a very, very wild year and a half, basically. And I've been pregnant for a lot of it.
Well, I mean, you've been through a lot, and I know, like you mentioned, no parent ever thinks they're going to have to be the one to make that decision.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you had your family there for support.
Yep.
Do you find it hard to talk about having to make that choice to terminate? Like, do you find that a lot of people don't understand what you had to go through?
That's a really good question. I personally don't, but I think most people in my position do. So I live in California in a very liberal area. I am surrounded by a lot of very liberal people. And like my sister works for Planned Parenthood. My family is clearly very supportive. So I haven't actually had any issues personally with anybody saying anything to me or having a problem understanding it. And I'm sure that there are maybe some like distant family members who don't necessarily agree. Like I have some family members who are certainly on the religious side and a little bit more conservative who I think strongly disagree with what we did, but also understand why we did it. And I think that's the thing, is if you tell them like, okay, we heard this about our baby is going to die inside of me. Like this baby is not going to make it to term. So we can keep waiting and let that baby suffer and let myself suffer. Like I think a lot of people can really understand with that decision when you get into the details of it. But when you initially start off and say, I terminated a pregnancy for medical reasons, it's like usually a very big wall comes down and like people do not understand. On that note, it was actually really interesting in that first night when we were calling our family to tell them about baby's diagnosis. Both my father and my mother-in-law said to us, oh, I assume if you choose to terminate, you would tell people that you miscarried. Basically for that exact reason, like you would mask it, you wouldn't tell people your decision. And I said, oh no, that's exactly why we're going to tell people. There's a very big difference, and pregnancy loss is pregnancy loss, but there are some terrible things about having to make that decision. And there are some beautiful things about knowing that my body can carry a baby to term. And this was not an issue that I physically had. Like I don't have any doubt in my body's ability to do this. And I think if I'd had a miscarriage or premature labor or something like that, there would be a lot of worry about a subsequent pregnancy in a way that we didn't have to have for this.
Right. That makes sense.
So yeah, so that was kind of interesting. And also just from a political standpoint of we have to talk about this, because if we don't talk about this, nobody knows that it's an issue. Nobody knows that it's happening. And everybody, like abortion is so politicized right now and it's so stigmatized, especially right now. And it is such a huge issue. And it's something that we just need to talk about.
I agree. And I'm really glad that you were willing to come on and talk about it, because so many people don't, and a lot of the people that I know, I'm from Texas originally, I'm in Georgia now. So obviously we're kind of the opposite political climate. So I'm not as familiar with with the process in California, but did you have a deadline? Like, did you have to have it done by a certain week, or did you have any kind of deadline like that?
Yeah. And again, luckily I'm in California, so the deadline's pretty late. But the deadline would have been 23 weeks and 5 days because it's a 2-day procedure. And at 24 weeks is when they consider viability. So they would have done everything they can to save the baby at that point. So we were hearing all of this around like 20 to 21 weeks. So we did have some time, but it's not a lot of time. And luckily, our baby's issues were physical. So in that ultrasound, we could see those issues and we knew what we were up against. There are a lot of people in our situation who find out things that are chromosomal and not necessarily physical issues that you can see. So they want to go and do subsequent testing. We also asked for subsequent testing. I went and got an amniocentesis, but we also realized that that would show us issues beyond the omphalocele, and the omphalocele itself was a big enough issue. We knew that that baby was going to suffer and that they weren't going to make it with that alone. So we could make our decisions without necessarily needing subsequent information. And a lot of people in our position don't have that. So they need more testing to figure out how severe is this, how much of an issue is this, what exactly is going on. And then you are really running up against the clock. And that's something that, again, we didn't really have to deal with. And I know is true of a lot of people in our situation.
I had never even really thought about that, the physical versus the stuff that, they have, but you can't really say how exactly it will affect them.
Yeah.
Because like Jasmine, she had, she had a physical problem with her CDH, but then she also had mosaic trisomy 15. And how do you measure how that's going to affect a baby, So that's a really good point you bring up.
Yeah. And we actually found out that it's possible that our baby had mosaic Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome, because the amniotic fluid, or the amniocentesis, showed that baby did not have it. But then when baby was actually born, they did an autopsy, and it looked like maybe baby did have it based on some of the characteristics that they found. But it would have been mosaic in that sense where, only some of the cells had it. So maybe the liver had it, and that's why the liver was enlarged and had these issues and stuff. And it's like that can lead to so many other issues later on. And yeah, it's just so hard to know.
So before you had to go through this, did you know anybody else who had to go through it?
Not at all. I'd never heard about it. So it's called termination for medical reasons, TFMR. And it was not a term that I even knew until a couple of weeks after we went through it. And I was kind of Googling around to see, like, is this a thing? Do other people have this? Like, I can't be the only one. And somehow came across a few websites, but it's interesting because there's no real data out there about how common this is. Like, we have stats on stillbirth, we have stats on miscarriage, and of course there's they're not full and complete stats, but we have information out there. And there's just not really information. When you start Googling termination for medical reasons, you come across personal websites of people's stories, which is so important to see and hear, but there's nothing on like the CDC, there's nothing on like Mayo Clinic, there's nothing on real factual evidence-based websites about how common this is, how to deal with it, like what resources are out there or anything like that. There is a little bit of information from the UK that I think is maybe 5 or 10 years old. And they actually found that terminations for medical reasons were, I think, twice as common as stillbirths. It was more common than stillbirths, which is shocking to me considering that nobody really talks about it. And again, there really isn't that much information out there about it.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's really surprising to me too, especially that just means that there's that many people that aren't talking about it, that aren't able to talk about it.
Exactly.
And I think it's hard enough having to learn that that your baby has an issue, having to make that decision, and then having to go out there and not being able to even talk about it.
Exactly. And there's so many people who wonder, you have the compounding thing of, did we make the right decision? And especially in our culture with the politicization of abortion that we have going on right now, you have a lot of people who are against abortion until they come up against in this kind of situation. And then they have to deal with their feelings around that, or knowing how their family's going to feel about it or their community's going to feel about it. And that is all compounding your actual experience of the pregnancy loss itself. And that's it's like a double whammy of that grief, and that, it just makes it so much harder to recover from. And that's something I'm so glad that I have been really open with my story and my experience, because I haven't had that, guilt, and I haven't had that like shame narrative, because I know that what I did, I made the right decision for myself and my family at the time with the information that I had. And I 100% would make that decision again in that same situation. And I know that other people don't, and that's okay, but that's my right and my ability to make that decision, and their right and their ability to make a different decision in that situation.
And like I said earlier, I'm really glad that you've been able to talk about it and, had people that were understanding. And because I think it's right. It's validation's not the right word. Like, I'm not trying to say like it gives you validation because you made the right decision, but it's like I don't know how to say it, I guess, like,
yeah,
it acknowledges your experience, you don't have to hide it, I guess. Because I've heard a lot of people who had to terminate, for a medical reason, that say just exactly like what you said. They asked if you were going to say if it was a miscarriage, that a lot of people just lie and say, oh, I had a stillbirth, I had a miscarriage, just to avoid that.
The baby.
Yeah. And I hate that.
I know. And I hate that too. And you should never have to tell people, it is not your duty to share your, inner grievance with other people. But you should be able to, if you want to, without feeling judged or threatened or shamed.
Yeah, people can get a little crazy. I've seen some really mean comments on Instagram, and I'm just like, yeah, we're just going to delete all these.
Yeah. Wild.
So why do you think?
Oh,
Oh,
go ahead. I was just going to say, nobody knows what you would do in that situation until you're in there. Like, it never occurred to me that I would end a pregnancy. Like, even if I had gotten pregnant when I was a teenager, like, I knew I will make this work. I will carry this baby to term. I will deal with it. But it never occurred to me that I might have a baby who, the life that we were looking at for that baby was going to be miserable if they even made it to term.
Right.
And that was like, it was by far the best decision we could make for that baby.
I think a lot of people don't understand, like you are thinking of the baby in that situation, like what's best for them. You don't want them to suffer. You don't want them to hurt.
Exactly.
Or live just a short life of pain,
Exactly.
Yeah. So why do you think it's important to share your story?
For all of those reasons we've talked about, I think it's so important. The more that I have shared my story, the more that I have connected with complete strangers on the internet who are going through the same thing. And it's absolutely fascinating to me. I would say at least once a month, somebody completely random reaches out to me on social media and says, oh, hey, I'm a TFMR mom also. Or, hey, I'm about to go through this. Can you help me? Or do you have resources? Or what was it like for you? Or how did you choose labor versus a D&C? How did you choose all of these sorts of things? And it's so important to have people out there who can answer those questions for you, who can share those resources, because they're not widely available and they're not obvious. And I mean, even the termination for medical reasons terminology isn't terminology that a lot of people know. So being able to talk about it and share it, I've actually connected with a lot of people in similar situations, and it's been really, really powerful for me. It's a community that nobody ever wants to be a part of. The whole pregnancy loss community is a community nobody wants to be a part of, but thank God there's a community there, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know what I would have done without it,
Exactly. Yeah. And I've also found, even beyond the TFMR specific, part of my experience, I've had a lot of people reach out and say, oh, hey, I'm actually going through a miscarriage right now. Can I talk to you about it? Or can I ask you some questions? Or, how did you know that you had retained tissue? And what did you do about it? And how did the misoprostol work for you? And all of those sorts of things. Or, hey, my friend is going through pregnancy loss right now. What can I do to support her? And oh my gosh, I have a lot of very strong feelings of things that you can do to help and things that you absolutely should not do to help and things that you should not say. Placating words of like, well, at least you're young and you could try again is just so painful in those moments. So I have a lot of thoughts and feelings on those sorts of things. And it's been helpful to know that I can support people who are going through these terrible experiences or their community around them and hopefully make it a little bit easier.
I think that's one of the best things is someone trusting you to reach out to you, with these questions, and then you being able to provide help. I love being able to do that for other people because I mean, it sucks being in this position. It sucks losing a baby. There's nothing like great about it, So yeah, you know what they're going through.
Yeah, exactly.
So do you have any advice for someone who's like newly going through a pregnancy loss or having to go through a termination?
Specifically for a termination, trust yourself. You didn't make that decision lightly, and it is the right decision for you and your family at that time. You are always allowed to question that and worry about that and have your feelings, but know that you did what you could at the time with the information that you had. So hopefully you can kind of let go of some of that pain, and that self-judgment that goes on with it. And for people who are experiencing pregnancy loss, TFMR or not, as much as you can, talk about it. Talk about it with your community, talk about it with your partner, talk about it with your family. Again, as much as you are interested in doing, as much as you are able to do, but find people who you can, because if you just bottle those feelings up inside, it eats you alive. Postpartum.net is a wonderful website. They have free online virtual support groups. They even have some for TFMR, which is really fantastic. So you can find safe places online if you're not comfortable meeting with people in person or anything like that, but find people you can talk to and get those feelings out. For me personally, writing was really helpful. I found that I couldn't really say what I was feeling necessarily, but I could sit down late at night and just write a note on my phone and just vent and get my feelings out. And then I knew what I needed to talk to my husband about and say, like, hey, I'm really struggling and here's what I'm struggling with, because I kind of written it down and thought it over a little bit. So that's something that I found really helpful, is like just being really open with my community. And that way they were able to support me in the ways that I actually needed.
I think that's really great advice, and thanks for the resource. I know sometimes it's hard to find groups, especially for the termination moms. So
yeah.
So going back to earlier when you were talking about how you make your play kits, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Total spin in the conversation. Yeah, yeah, so you can find me on social media at Messy Play Kits. I'm Robin, and yeah, they're like sensory activity kits for kids. So a lot of like baking soda and citric acid chemical reactions, a lot of water beads and oobleck and all sorts of slime, all sorts of fun things. So I make sensory bins and I make these little like science kits, and I sell them as monthly subscriptions, and I ship them nationwide. I also ship to Canada. And it's just so much fun. So I really enjoy what I do.
Is there like an age range for them, or?
Most of them are ages 3 to 8. I have a few things for infants and toddlers. And then like the sensory bins are really good for that preschool, like 3 to 5 age range. And the Messy Play kits, which are the like more engaged, more like parents would do the activities with their kids. You're erupting volcanoes and doing that sort of thing. Those are ages 3 to 8 or so.
That sounds fun. Sounds like stuff I'd want to do too.
I know.
Who
That's
doesn't
why
like
I
to
made
play,
a whole
right?
job of it. Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story with us. I really appreciate having you on.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It's always nice to be able to get out there and share my story. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin, for sharing your story with us. Sharing about your story of terminating for medical reasons is so important. Because like you said, it's such a politicized subject, something that everybody wants to have a say in. And people are just so polarized. They're either completely on one side or completely on the other, and there's not really a lot of middle ground on this. And I think sharing stories of the people who had to make this decision helps bring light to such a taboo subject. It's still the loss of a baby, a very wanted baby. I think people forget so many times the parents make this decision because they're trying to make the most compassionate choice. It's not a decision that anybody makes lightly. This is just a reminder to be kind to the parents who have had to make this decision. It's not a decision anyone ever wanted to have to make. It's certainly not one anybody ever thought they would have to make or to have to be in the position to have to make. And you just never know what you would do in their shoes. You can say and think all you want that it's something you may never do, but you don't really know unless you are in that position. I know there are several people who have shared their stories who had to make that decision to terminate, and a lot of them said they never thought that they would be the one doing it. So again, it just goes back to you don't really know what you would do until you are actually put in that position. So this is just a reminder again to just be kind, be understanding, even if it's, like I said, a decision you think you wouldn't have made. You don't know everything that happened with, the other families. So I just want to remind everybody that these families deserve a place in the lost community and that they deserve a place to share their story without judgment. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If there's ever a topic you'd like to hear on the show, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, you can feel free to email me at Sarah, which is SARAH, at journeyforjasmine.com, or you can send me a message on either Instagram or Facebook at Journey for Jasmine. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember, We are all in this together.